The concealer wasn't working today. Maren Cole stood in the bathroom of her studio apartment, tilting her chin under the bad overhead light, and watched the left side of her jaw refuse to cooperate. The scar tissue there caught light differently than regular skin. It was smoother, almost shiny, like something had been pressed flat and never fully healed the right way. Which, technically, was true. She dabbed another layer on with the little sponge, blending it in small circles the way the YouTube tutorial had shown her 4 years ago. Back when she'd first needed to learn this skill, nobody teaches you in school. Cover, blend, set with powder, check under 3 different light sources, because foundation that looks fine under bathroom light can look like a mask under fluorescence. Come on, she muttered at her own reflection. Her phone buzzed on the edge of the sink. A text from her sister Dee. You still doing the interview at Croft Tower today? That's like the company. Don't be weird. Maren typed back with one thumb while blending with the other hand. Not being weird. Just nervous. You're gonna crush it. You always undersell yourself, lol. Maren didn't answer that one. She wasn't sure it was true, and she didn't have the energy to argue with her sister about it at 7:40 in the morning. The scars ran from just under her left ear down along her jaw and disappeared into her collar. Old ones. From a car accident when she was 22. The kind of accident people call a miracle when you survive it and don't ask too many follow-up questions about what came after. 3 surgeries. 2 years of not looking in mirrors longer than she had to. A slow, boring, unglamorous process of learning to exist in her own face again. Most days she didn't think about it much anymore. Today, with a final round interview for a research position at Croft Holdings, the actual Croft Holdings, the one that owned half the archival grants in the tri-state area, she thought about it a lot. She finished the makeup. It looked good. Not perfect, but good enough that a stranger wouldn't stare. She'd take good enough. Croft Tower didn't look like a place that hired archivists. It looked like a place that hired assassins, or fashion editors, or people who'd never once eaten a granola bar standing up at a kitchen counter like Maren had that morning. The lobby was all dark marble and cold light, and the receptionist had cheekbones sharp enough to cut paper. Miss Cole? The receptionist said, not looking up from her screen right away. You're for the special collections position. That's me. 28th floor. Mr. Croft will be sitting in on the final round personally. Maren's stomach dropped slightly. Nobody had mentioned that on the phone. Mr. Croft as in Nathaniel Croft, yes. The receptionist finally looked up, and something in her expression flickered, not quite pity, not quite warning. He doesn't usually do interviews. Don't be late. The elevator ride took either 4 seconds or 4 hours. Maren genuinely couldn't tell which. She checked her reflection in the brushed steel panel of the elevator door, tilted her jaw, decided it was fine, decided she was being paranoid, decided to stop looking at herself entirely. The 28th floor was quiet, in a way that felt intentional. No open office chatter, no ringing phones, just long hallways and closed doors, and at the end of one hallway, a conference room with glass walls, and a man already seated inside it. Alone. Reading something on a tablet with the kind of stillness that made Maren's skin prickle before she even opened the door. He looked up when she knocked. And Maren had the strange immediate sensation, the kind you get maybe twice in your life, of being looked at by someone who was actually looking, not glancing, not scanning, but genuinely taking in every detail in the span of one breath. Miss Cole, he said. Sit. Not please sit. Just sit. Like a man who wasn't used to needing the word please and had never bothered picking it up. She sat. Nathaniel Croft, he said, though she already knew. His voice was low, even, the kind of voice that didn't need volume to fill a room. You have a background in early modern manuscript conservation, Your thesis was on ink degradation in 17th century correspondence. You read my thesis? I read everything relevant to a hire I'm sitting in on personally. He set the tablet down. It was good. Occasionally overcautious in your conclusions, but good. Marin blinked. Nobody had ever called her thesis overcautious. Mostly people called it very thorough, which was academic code for long and slightly boring. I stand by the caution, she said, before she could stop herself. Overclaiming in conservation science gets things destroyed. I'd rather be boring and right. Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. The suggestion of one. Held back on purpose. Good answer, he said. The interview went on like that for 20 minutes sharp, fast, no small talk. Questions that actually tested whether she knew what she was doing, instead of whether she could perform confidence in a blazer. Marin found herself relaxing into it, the specific kind of relaxation that comes from being asked real questions instead of being watched. And then, without any change in his tone at all, Nathaniel said, "How did you get the scarring on your jaw?" The room went very quiet. Marin's hand moved just slightly, just a reflex toward her jaw, before she caught herself and put it back in her lap. "That's not a question you're allowed to ask in an interview," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "You're right. I withdraw it." He didn't look apologetic. Exactly, he looked like a man noting a fact for later. "I ask because I could see it before you sat down, and I find it interesting that you spent, I'd guess, 40 minutes covering it this morning, and it's still visible to me. Not the scar itself. The effort. That's a strange thing to say to someone in a job interview." "I say a lot of strange things," Nathaniel said. "It rarely bothers me." Marin stared at him. There was something in the way he'd said it not cruel, not curious in the invasive way people got sometimes, the way that made her want to disappear into the floor. It was more like he'd noticed a fact about a manuscript, an observation. Filed and moved past. "Car accident," she said finally, because staying silent felt worse than answering. 5 years ago. It's not I don't need it acknowledged. I'm good at my job regardless of what my face looks like. I never suggested otherwise. Nathaniel picked the tablet back up, and for a second, Marin thought the moment had simply closed, filed away like everything else about her apparently was in his mind. Then he added, almost offhand, "For what it's worth, the concealer is excellent work. I mean that as a compliment to your skill, not a comment on the need for it." Marin didn't know what to do with that sentence. It sat strangely in her chest, not quite an insult, not quite kind, occupying some third category she didn't have a name for. "Thank you," she said carefully. "I think." "You're overqualified for the position as posted," Nathaniel said, moving on with no transition at all. Like the previous 30 seconds hadn't happened. "I'm restructuring the offer. You'll report directly to Special Collections leadership, not the General Archive pool." The salary listed was insulting. "I've already told HR to correct it." Wait, what? You heard me. You can't just restructure a job offer because you decided to mid-interview. "I can," Nathaniel said. "It's my company." Marin laughed before she could stop herself, a short, surprised sound, nothing polished about it. "Okay, sure, fine, that's okay. You're allowed to say thank you. I'm allowed to be suspicious of a billionaire who redesigns a job offer because I said one correct thing about ink degradation." Marin shot back and immediately wondered if she'd just torpedoed the whole thing. Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment. Something about his stillness was different from other people's stillness, like he wasn't holding himself still. Like stillness was simply his default state and movement was the thing that required effort. "I like that you said that," he said finally. "Most people don't push back on me. Most people probably need the job more than they need to win an argument. And you don't?" "I need the job," Marin admitted. I just also don't like being handled. Even nicely. Nathaniel almost smiled again, that same held-back thing at the corner of his mouth. Noted. He said. HR will call you this afternoon. She got home that evening still turning the interview over in her head, replaying the 10 seconds where he'd asked about her jaw, and she'd wanted to sink through the floor, and the strange 30 seconds after where he'd said something that wasn't quite comfort, but wasn't cruelty either. She wiped the makeup off that night. Really wiped it off. All the way. Standing in front of the bathroom mirror under the bad light, looking at the smooth shine of the scar tissue along her jaw, the way she rarely let herself look anymore. The effort, he'd said. I could see the effort. Nobody had ever put it that way before. Most people either pretended not to notice at all, which felt like being erased, or noticed too obviously, which felt like being catalogued as damaged. He'd done neither. He'd noticed the work of hiding it, which was somehow a stranger, more specific kind of seeing than either of the other two. She didn't get the HR call that afternoon. She got a call from an unknown number at 9:40 that night, and when she picked up, it was him. Miss Cole. Mr. Croft. It's late. I don't sleep much, Nathaniel said. Like that explained everything, which she'd learned later for him. It kind of did. I wanted to tell you the offer myself, instead of letting HR flatten it into a form letter. You start Monday, if you accept. You could have emailed that. I could have, he agreed. There was a pause on the line, the kind of pause that felt considered rather than accidental. I don't often meet people who correct me in the first 20 minutes of knowing me. I wanted to hear if you'd take the job anyway. Marin sat down on the edge of her bed, phone pressed to her ear, scar tissue bare under her own bathroom light 3 feet away, and felt something she hadn't expected to feel after a day like this one. Curious, not about the job. About him. I'll take the job, she said, but I'm still suspicious of you. Good, Nathaniel said, and this time she could hear the smile in his voice, even through the phone. Stay that way. It'll be useful. Monday came faster than Marin expected. She stood outside Croft Tower at 8:52 for a 9:00 start, holding a coffee she wasn't going to finish because her hands needed something to do, and told herself this was a normal first day at a normal job. It didn't feel normal. It felt like walking into weather. The special collections floor was nothing like the general offices below. No fluorescent lights, no cubicles, just long reading tables under warm lamps and shelving that ran floor to ceiling behind climate-controlled glass. A woman with cropped silver hair and reading glasses pushed up into it met her at the elevator. You're the coal hire, the woman said. Not a question. I'm Priya. I run this floor, technically. Though apparently now I share that with you, according to the memo I got at 11 p.m. on Saturday. I didn't ask for that, Marin said quickly. I don't know what happened with the restructuring, I just relaxed. Priya waved a hand. I'm not mad. I've been asking for another conservator for 2 years. I'm just telling you the memo was weird, because everything involving him is weird. She started walking, and Marin followed. You met him already? Friday, during the interview. He doesn't do interviews. That's what the receptionist said too. Priya glanced sideways at her, something assessing in the look, though not unkind. Well, welcome to the strangest job you'll ever love. Let's get you a badge. The work itself, at least, felt familiar. Manuscripts needing stabilization, a water-damaged ledger from the 1800s that needed careful drying, a box of correspondence nobody had cataloged properly in decades. Marin lost herself in it the way she always did, hours disappearing into the specific, quiet satisfaction of doing careful work with her hands. She didn't see Nathaniel again until Wednesday. He appeared at the far end of the reading room without any announcement. The way she was starting to notice, he seemed to appear everywhere, like he didn't believe in doors making noise. Priya straightened slightly when she saw him. Everyone on the floor did, a subtle recalibration, like the room's gravity had shifted a few degrees. "Miss Cole." He stopped at her table, looking down at the document she was working on, a fragile letter, ink browned with age, sealed under a sheet of thin archival film while she worked. "What is this?" "Correspondence. 1820s, I think. Unlabeled, unfortunately, so I'm working from paper stock and ink composition to date it more precisely. Show me." She turned the document slightly so he could see it without touching it. He leaned down, not too close, but close enough that she noticed again how still he held himself, like a photograph of a person rather than a person. His eyes moved over the faded handwriting with the same total focus he'd given her thesis. "This is a love letter," he said after a moment. "I know. I haven't gotten to the sentimental part of my job yet. I've been dating the paper. The handwriting changes here." He pointed, not touching the glass, just gesturing above it. Steadier at the start. Shakier by the third paragraph. Whoever wrote this was working themselves up to something, and it cost them something to finish it. Marin looked at the letter again, at the place he'd pointed to, and felt a small, unexpected jolt of surprise. He was right. She'd noted the shift in her preliminary assessment, inconsistent hand pressure, possible emotional state, but she hadn't expected him to see it in 10 seconds standing over her shoulder. "You're better at this than I expected," she admitted. "I've read a great number of letters like this one," Nathaniel said. Something in his tone went quieter, further away, like he was looking at something behind the document instead of the document itself. "Over a long time. How long?" He looked at her then, and there was a beat, small but real, where something calculating passed behind his eyes, like he was deciding how much truth a sentence could hold before it became a problem. "Longer than you'd guess," he said finally, and moved on before she could ask anything else. It became a pattern over the following weeks, though Marin didn't clock it as a pattern until it was already well underway. He'd appear at odd hours, never during normal business hours, when other executives might reasonably wander a floor, but late afternoon, early evening. Once at nearly 9 at night when she'd stayed late finishing a restoration, and looked up to find him already 3 feet away, having apparently made no sound at all in his approach. "You should go home," he said that night. "I'm almost done." "You've been almost done for 40 minutes. I've been watching." Marin's hand stilled over the document. "That's a little unsettling, Mr. Croft, Nathaniel," he said. "You work for me directly now. Mr. Croft is what people call me when they're afraid of me. Aren't I supposed to be afraid of you? You're apparently the type of employer who redesigns job offers on a whim and appears silently behind employees at 9 p.m. "You're not afraid of me," Nathaniel said. It wasn't a question. "You haven't been since the interview." She thought about denying it, and found she couldn't. Quite, there was something about him that should have frightened her, the total stillness. The way conversations with him felt like standing near something with far more mass than its size suggested, and yet it hadn't. Not really. Not since that first day when he'd said the effort instead of the scar, and something in her had recalibrated what kind of person she thought he was. "I'm cautious of you," she said instead. "That's different. Cautious is smarter," Nathaniel said. "Fear makes people stupid. I prefer caution." He nodded toward the document. "Finish tomorrow. It'll survive the night. Bold of you to give conservation advice. I've kept things intact for a very long time, Miss Cole." A pause. "Marin," he corrected himself, testing the name like it required deliberate permission. "May I call you Marin?" The question caught her off guard, not the question itself, but the fact that he'd asked it at all. This man who'd walked into her interview and started restructuring job offers without consulting anyone. "You may," she said. "Marin," he repeated, and something about the way he said it made her stomach do something she didn't have a polite word for. The scars stopped being a thing she thought about hiding around him somewhere in week 3, though she couldn't point to the exact moment it happened. It wasn't dramatic. He never brought it up again after that first day. He simply never reacted to it, not with the too careful blankness of people trying not to stare, not with the flinch some strangers still gave her on bad days, not with anything at all. He looked at her face the same way every time, which was, like it was simply her face, unremarkable in the sense that mattered. The scars just one more true fact about a person he was paying close attention to. It made her stop reapplying concealer by Thursday of the 3rd week. She noticed the choice only after she'd already made it, standing in her bathroom that morning, hand hovering over the little sponge, deciding not to bother. Dee noticed over video call that weekend. "You're not wearing You're the Thing. The cover stuff. I forgot. Marin lied. You never forget. You've worn it every day for 5 years. I've just been busy." Dee gave her a long look through the screen. The specific look she'd been giving Marin since they were teenagers. The one that saw through excuses like they were tissue paper. "This have anything to do with the vampire CEO you keep almost not mentioning?" "He's not a vampire, Dee. That's ridiculous. You've said that exact sentence 3 times now, and I never once said vampire before you did." Marin opened her mouth, closed it again, and felt heat crawl up her neck. "It's not nothing's happening. He's my employer." "Uh-huh," Dee said, entirely unconvinced, and Marin was privately, uncomfortably aware that her sister had a point she wasn't ready to examine yet. The thing that finally cracked it open happened on a Tuesday, 6 weeks in, when Marin stayed past midnight trying to save a water-damaged 1700s ledger that had started developing mold along one edge, the kind of emergency conservation work that couldn't wait for morning without risking real, irreversible loss. She was elbow-deep in the careful, tedious process of separating pages when Nathaniel appeared, this time not silent, this time with 2 cups of something hot in his hands, which was such a strange domestic image against everything else she knew about him that she actually stopped working to stare. "You're going to lose that page," he said, nodding at the ledger, "if you keep forcing the separation instead of letting the humidity chamber do its work. I know how to do my job. I know you do. I'm making conversation while I hand you tea you didn't ask for." He set 1 cup down carefully, outside the work zone. "Chamomile. I was told humans find it calming, though I confess I've never tested the theory personally. You don't sleep, so I guess you wouldn't need to." "I don't sleep," he agreed. "Not the way you mean it, at least." Marin straightened, wiping her hands on the cloth at her hip, and looked at him properly, really looked. The way she hadn't quite let herself in 6 weeks of careful professional distance. The cold light of the reading lamps did something strange to his face, sharpened it in a way regular light didn't. His eyes, she noticed for the first time, didn't quite catch the light the way eyes normally did. They seemed to hold it instead, like something reflective set just slightly wrong. "Nathaniel," she said slowly, "what are you?" The question hung there. He didn't answer immediately, and the not answering was, itself, an answer of a kind. "That's a very direct question," he said finally. "You ask me direct questions all the time, about my face, about my work, about whether I'm afraid of you. Seems fair I get one back eventually." Something shifted in him, not fear, not defensiveness, something closer to a decision being made behind a very old, very careful set of eyes. "Sit down, Marin," he said quietly. "I think it's time I told you the truth." She sat, not because he'd told her she was getting better at ignoring that particular tone of his, the one that expected obedience without asking for it directly, but because something in his voice had changed, gone lower and older, and some part of her animal brain understood that whatever came next mattered. "I'm going to tell you something," Nathaniel said, "and you're going to want to believe I'm joking, or unwell, or testing you somehow. I'm not. I need you to just listen before you decide what you think. Okay. I was born in 1687. He said it flatly, like a fact from a report, not a confession. In a village outside what's now Ljubljana. I was turned in 1709, at the age of 22, by a woman who is long dead now, and whose name doesn't matter for this conversation. I have been alive, in the sense that matters, for 339 years. Maren didn't laugh. She'd expected, somewhere in the back of her mind, that if this moment ever came, and some quiet, unacknowledged part of her had wondered about it, about the coldness of his skin the one time their hands had brushed, about the way he never ate in front of her, about the strange gravitational stillness of him, she'd laugh, or panic, or feel some clean, obvious emotion. Instead, she felt oddly calm, the way you feel calm in the eye of something, right before you register how big the storm actually is. Vampire, she said. Not a question either. Vampire, he confirmed. I run the East Coast covens, such as they are. Croft Holdings is real. The money is real. All of it is exactly as real as it appears, and also none of it is the actual center of my life, which is older and stranger than a company built 40 years ago. You drink blood. When necessary. Not from unwilling sources, and not a small, tired exhale. Not from you, if that's the question underneath the question. Maren's face went hot. I wasn't asking that. You were thinking it. It's fine. It's a reasonable thing to think. He was watching her carefully, gauging something, the way he gauged the ink degradation on old letters patient. Precise, waiting for the pattern to become clear. I hired you because you were the best conservator I'd interviewed in a decade. I kept finding reasons to see you because he stopped. Because? Because I wanted to, Nathaniel said simply. Which is not a sentence I've had much use for in 3 centuries. Wanting things, the way mortals want things casually, without calculation. Without a political cost attached, I stopped being able to do that a long time ago. Until you started correcting my grammar on Christie's auction paperwork and telling me my preservation methods were, I believe your exact phrase was, a crime against basic chemistry. Despite everything, Maren felt a small, unwilling smile pull at her mouth. That was accurate. It was. He agreed. I liked that you said it anyway. They sat there for a moment in the quiet of the reading room, the water-damaged ledger still spread between them, forgotten for now, the tea going cold in its 2 cups. Why now? Maren asked finally. Why tell me tonight? Because you asked what I was, directly, to my face, and you deserved a true answer, instead of a deflection. I've deflected that question for 300 years. I found, tonight, that I didn't want to do it to you. He paused. And because there are people vampires who already know you exist, who've noticed how much time I spend on this floor, and I would rather you understand the danger before it arrives than be caught by it blind. Maren's stomach tightened. Danger. There's a woman, Nathaniel said, and something in his jaw went tight in a way she hadn't seen before, named Victoria. She and I have history old, unpleasant history, and she does not like it when I show interest in anyone she can't control or intimidate. She'll have heard about you by now. People talk. What does that mean for me? Practically, it means I need you to trust me when I tell you certain precautions aren't paranoia, Nathaniel said. And it means if you want to walk away from this from me, from any of it I would understand completely, and I would make sure you were protected regardless. I'm not going to trap you in something you didn't choose with full information. Maren studied him, the stillness of him, the strange old weight behind his eyes, the way he'd just handed her an exit door in the same breath as a warning, instead of using the danger to make her feel like she needed him more. I'm not walking away, she said. You should think about it before you say that. I have scars on my face from a car accident I don't remember most of, Maren said. I spent 2 years barely leaving my apartment because I couldn't handle people looking at me like I was something broken. You're the first person who ever looked at me and saw a person doing careful, difficult work instead of a tragedy to feel sorry for. I'm not walking away from that because you also happen to be 300 years old and occasionally drink blood. Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment, something unguarded moving across his face that she hadn't seen there before. Not the careful control, not the amused restraint. Something raw underneath both of those things. You are, he said slowly, an extraordinarily strange woman. You're an extraordinarily strange vampire. I think we're even. He walked her home that night, insisted on it. Actually, in a tone that didn't leave much room for argument, though Maren noted with some satisfaction that she argued anyway, on principle, before letting him win. The city at midnight felt different beside him. Quieter, the ordinary noises of traffic and distant sirens somehow muted by his presence, like even the world adjusted itself around him without being asked. Can I ask something? Maren said as they walked. You've been asking things all night. I don't see why you'd stop now. The letter. The one you read over my shoulder. The love letter from the 1820s. You said you'd read a great number of letters like it, over a long time. Was that she hesitated? Was that about someone specific? Nathaniel was quiet for a moment, long enough that Maren thought maybe she'd overstepped, found the one door he wasn't ready to open even after everything else he'd already told her. There was someone, he said finally. A long time ago. Before Victoria even, it ended badly. The way most things ended badly in that century plague, mostly, and grief, and my own inability to save her from either. His voice stayed level, but something underneath it had gone careful, controlled the way people control something that still has teeth. I don't talk about it. I'm telling you because I don't want you to think you're the first thing I've ever cared about. You're not. You're the first thing I've cared about in a very long time, which is different, and which matters more to me than I know how to say properly. Maren didn't say anything right away. She just reached over, in the quiet dark of the sidewalk, and took his hand, his cold, still hand, the one that had unsettled her the first time they'd touched, and held it like it was an ordinary thing to do, like he was an ordinary person walking her home. Thank you for telling me, she said. Nathaniel looked down at their joined hands like he wasn't entirely sure what to do with the sensation, like 3 centuries hadn't prepared him for something this small and this specific. Thank you for staying, he said quietly, when you had every reason not to. Victoria found her 3 weeks later. Maren was leaving a coffee shop 2 blocks from Croft Tower, on her lunch break, phone in one hand and a bag with a sandwich she wouldn't finish in the other, when a woman fell into step beside her with the kind of unhurried, deliberate elegance that made Maren's skin prickle before her mind caught up to the reason why. Maren Cole, the woman said. Blonde, beautiful in a sharp, cold way, wearing red like it was a weapon rather than a color. I've heard so much about you. Maren's stomach dropped. She didn't need an introduction to know exactly who this was. Victoria, she said, keeping her voice steadier than she felt. He told you my name. How touching. Victoria's smile didn't reach her eyes, which Maren noticed with a cold, distant part of her brain flashed faintly amber in the daylight, just for a second, just enough to confirm everything. Walk with me. I only need a moment. I don't think I want to. I don't think you have much choice, darling, unless you'd like this conversation to happen somewhere less public. Victoria's tone stayed pleasant, conversational, which was somehow worse than if she'd been openly threatening. I'm not going to hurt you here. Too many cameras, too many witnesses, and Nathaniel would be tediously upset with me. I just want to look at you properly, see what he's chosen this time. Maren kept walking, refusing to slow down, refusing to let the fear show on her face the way she'd spent 5 years, refusing to let her scars define her expression. This time? Oh, he hasn't told you about the others? Victoria's eyebrow arched, delighted there have been a few, over the centuries. Human women he grows fond of. It never lasts. Either they find out what he is and run screaming, which is the merciful outcome, or they don't run. And then time simply she made a small, elegant gesture with one hand, takes them anyway, the way it takes every mortal thing eventually. He watches them age and die while he stays exactly as he is. It's rather sad, honestly, if you think about it too long. I try not to. The words landed exactly where Victoria had aimed them. Maren felt the cold logic of it settle into her chest like a stone. She hadn't thought about it. Not really. Not in those terms. Not about what forever, with someone who didn't age, looked like from the wrong end of the hourglass. "Why are you telling me this?" Maren asked. "Because I like Nathaniel," Victoria said. And for a moment something almost genuine flickered across her expression, old and complicated, and not entirely unkind. Difficult as that may be to believe. I've known him for 200 years. I watch him do this to himself, over and over, fall for some mortal woman with fire in her that reminds him what it used to feel like to be alive, and then watch him lose her, and grieve for a decade, and close himself off a little more each time. I'm tired of watching it. I'd rather you leave now, cleanly, before it becomes the kind of ending that actually damages him. That's not your decision to make." "No," Victoria agreed. "It's yours. I'm simply making sure you have the information to make it properly, since he clearly hasn't." She stopped walking, and Maren stopped with her, some instinct keeping her rooted even though every other instinct told her to run. "Ask him how many times, Maren. Ask him how many funerals he's attended for women who loved him. See if the number changes how you feel about staying." Victoria turned and walked away without waiting for a response, disappearing into the lunchtime crowd with the eerie, silent grace Maren remembered from Nathaniel. She supposed it was a vampire thing, that particular quality of movement, like the normal rules of displacing air and space, didn't apply the same way. Maren stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, sandwich forgotten in her hand, feeling the cold, precise damage of what Victoria had just done to her settle into every part of her chest. She didn't go back to work that afternoon. She texted Priya something vague about a headache and went home instead, sat on the edge of her bed in her too-quiet apartment, and stared at the wall for longer than she could account for afterward. How many times? She thought about the letter Nathaniel had read over her shoulder, the shaking handwriting, the letter he'd said cost someone something to finish. She thought about the way he'd said there was someone, a long time ago, and the careful, controlled way his voice had gone when he said it, like a man handling something with teeth. She thought about 339 years, and how many decades fit into a number that large, and how many women might fit into that many decades. Nathaniel found her there at 8 that evening. She hadn't texted him, hadn't told him anything was wrong, but apparently he'd noticed her absence from the floor and decided that was reason enough to come looking. "You weren't at work," he said, standing in her open doorway, something careful and searching in his expression. "Priya said you left with a headache. You don't get headaches, Maren. I've watched you work through actual physical injuries without complaint." "Victoria found me today," Maren said. Nathaniel went very still, a different kind of stillness than his usual stillness, something colder and more alarmed underneath the careful control. "Where? Are you hurt?" "I'm not hurt. She just talked to me." Maren pulled her knees up to her chest, sitting on the edge of the bed, feeling suddenly very young and very tired. "She told me about the others, the women before me. She said you watch them age and die, over and over, and grieve and close off a little more each time." Something in Nathaniel's face went carefully, deliberately blank the specific blankness of a man protecting a wound by refusing to acknowledge it. "That's true," he said quietly. "I won't lie to you about it. There have been others. It has ended badly, every time, one way or another." "How many? Does the number matter?" "Yes," Maren said, and her voice cracked slightly on the word, surprising her. "It matters, because I need to know if I'm the next entry in a very long list of women you loved and then buried. Nathaniel, I need to know if that's what I'm signing up for." Nathaniel crossed the room slowly and sat down on the edge of the bed, careful to leave space between them, like he understood correctly that closing that space right now wasn't something he'd earned yet. "4," he said finally, "in 330 years. 4 women I loved enough that losing them changed something permanent in me. The first was in 1715, the most recent was in 1962. He looked at his own hands, not at her. "I buried all 4 of them. I have stood at 4 gravesides and watched dirt cover 4 faces I loved, and each time I told myself I wouldn't do it again, and each time. Decades or centuries later, I did it again anyway, because apparently 300 years isn't long enough to learn better than to want things." Maren felt something in her chest crack open, not with fear this time, but with something sadder and more complicated grief, she realized, for a loss that wasn't even hers, for a man who'd buried 4 lifetimes of love and kept doing it anyway. "Victoria wants you to leave," Nathaniel said. "I assume that's the point of the conversation she engineered. She said it would be kinder to end it before it becomes the kind of ending that damages you." "She's not entirely wrong," Nathaniel admitted, and the honesty of it hurt worse than if he'd argued. "It will end, Maren. Eventually, one way or another. Time will take you from me, the way it's taken everyone else I've loved, and I will grieve you the way I've grieved 4 other women, and it will very possibly be the thing that finally breaks something in me that hasn't broken yet, after 3 centuries of practice at not breaking." "Then why are you here?" Maren asked. "Why did you let this happen at all, if you knew how it ends?" Nathaniel looked at her then, really looked. The way he had that first day in the interview, total and complete attention. Nothing held back. "Because the alternative is 300 more years of not letting it happen," he said quietly. "Of staying safe, and untouched, and permanently, comfortably, empty. I did that for 40 years before I met you, Maren. 40 years of nothing, because nothing was safer than this. And I would rather have whatever time I get with you 10 years, 40 years, however long you're given, than another century of nothing at all." He reached out, slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, and brushed his knuckles gently along the scarred side of her jaw, the same place he'd looked at that first day, instead of looking away from. "You get to decide if that's a fair trade for you. I won't ask you to make that decision quickly, or make it for you. But I needed you to hear it, honestly. From me. Not from Victoria's version of it." Maren sat with that for a long moment, feeling the cool weight of his hand against her jaw, feeling the specific, careful honesty of everything he'd just told her settle into the decision she was about to make. "I need some time to think," she said finally. "Take it," Nathaniel said. "I'm not going anywhere. I have, unfortunately, an excess of time." She took 4 days. She didn't go into the office, texted Priya that she needed a short personal leave, which Priya granted without asking questions, though Maren suspected Priya knew, or guessed, something of what was happening. She spent the 4 days doing ordinary things on purpose, calling Dee, going for long walks through the neighborhood, sitting in her apartment with the lights off some nights, just thinking, letting the enormity of the decision sit in her chest without rushing to resolve it. On the second day, Dee came over with takeout and sat across from Maren at the kitchen table, watching her with the specific patience of a sister who'd learned, over 30 years, exactly when to push, and when to just be present. "You don't have to tell me everything," Dee said, unpacking cartons of noodles, "but you look like someone who's carrying something heavy, and I'd rather you carry it near me than alone in this apartment." Marin almost laughed. "It's complicated. Everything worth having is complicated. That's not new information." Dee slid a carton across the table. "Is it about him?" "Yeah, good or bad complicated." Marin thought about it, really thought about it, turning the question over the way she turned over old manuscripts, looking for the true shape underneath the surface damage. "Both," she said finally. "He's Dee. He's not what I thought he was. He's more than I thought he was, in a lot of ways, and it's terrifying, and I don't know if I'm the kind of person who's brave enough for it. You survived a car accident that nearly killed you and rebuilt your entire sense of self from scratch afterward," Dee said, not unkindly, just factually. "I think you're plenty brave, Marin. I think the question isn't whether you're brave enough. It's whether it's actually worth being brave for." Marin didn't answer that directly, but she thought about it for the rest of the night, long after Dee had gone home, long after the noodles had gone cold on the table, and she thought about it again the next morning, standing in front of her bathroom mirror, looking at her own scarred face under the bad light. She thought about 5 years of covering the scars every morning, out of habit, out of self-protection, out of a fear that had calcified into routine long after the original wound had healed. She thought about the specific relief of Nathaniel's eyes on her face, not flinching, not overcorrecting, just seeing her, plainly, the way you see a fact about a person you're paying attention to. She thought about 4 graves, and a man who kept choosing to love people anyway, knowing exactly how it would end, because the alternative was 300 years of choosing nothing at all. "I'd rather have whatever time I get with you than another century of nothing at all." She understood, standing there, that this wasn't really a question about vampires, or immortality, or the specific mechanics of loving someone who wouldn't age the way she would. It was a much older, much more ordinary question, the same one every person eventually has to answer about every important thing in their life. Was the risk of loss worth the certainty of having loved something real, while she had it? She already knew her answer. She'd known it, she suspected, since the night he told her the truth and she'd taken his cold hand anyway, on a dark sidewalk, like it was the most natural thing in the world. She went back to Croft Tower on the 5th day, not to work. She still had 2 days of leave left, but straight up to the 28th floor, past a startled Priya, down the long, quiet hallway, to the office at the end where she knew, with some instinct she couldn't fully explain, that she'd find him. Nathaniel was standing at the window when she came in, the city spread out below him in the gray afternoon light, and he turned when he heard the door, something careful and braced in his expression, like a man expecting bad news and trying to prepare for it with dignity. "Marin, I thought about it," she said, not bothering with a preamble, because she'd spent 4 days circling the question and she was done circling it. All of it. The 4 graves, and the century of nothing, and Victoria's whole speech about mercy, and what it would mean to love someone who isn't going to age the way I do. And I don't want to spend the next however many years of my life covering scars nobody's asking me to cover, Marin said, or protecting myself from a loss that hasn't happened yet by refusing to have the thing in the first place. I spent 5 years doing that already, after the accident. Protecting myself so hard from being hurt again that I barely let myself be anything at all. I'm not doing that again. Not for you. Not for the fear of losing you eventually. Not for anything. Something in Nathaniel's face shifted, not relief, exactly. Something bigger and more careful than relief. Like a man watching a door open that he genuinely believed might stay closed. "You understand what you're choosing," he said quietly. It wasn't quite a question. I understand I'm choosing you, Marin said. For however long that ends up being, I'd rather have real time with you than safe distance from you. Dee said something to me the other night that the question isn't whether I'm brave enough, it's whether it's worth being brave for. I think it is. I think you're worth it. Nathaniel crossed the room to her, not with the eerie, silent speed she'd seen him use once against Victoria in a memory he'd described to her, but slowly, deliberately, like a man giving himself time to feel every step of an important moment instead of rushing through it. I have buried 4 women I loved, he said, stopping in front of her, close enough that she could feel the particular coolness that radiated from him, familiar now instead of alarming. I have 300 years of practice at surviving loss, and none of it has ever made the next loss easier. I want you to understand that going in. I'm not offering you an easy thing. I don't want an easy thing, Marin said. I want a real one. Then you have it, Nathaniel said, and reached up to brush his thumb along her jaw, along the scars she wasn't covering anymore, along the place where he'd first looked at her and seen a person instead of a wound, for however long we're given. All of it. Real, nothing held back. He kissed her then, carefully at first, like a man relearning something he'd almost forgotten how to do, and then less carefully, like 300 years of restraint, finally finding a reason not to hold quite so tightly. Marin kissed him back, standing in a corner office, 28 floors above a city that had no idea what was happening in it, and felt for the first time in 5 years, entirely and completely present in her own skin. 3 months later, Victoria found Marin again, this time at a Croft Holdings gala, uninvited but attending anyway, the way she apparently always managed to attend things she wasn't invited to. She looked Marin up and down with the same cold assessment as their first meeting, taking in the emerald dress, the confidence, the scars worn plainly along Marin's jaw without a trace of concealer. "You're still here," Victoria observed. "I'm still here," Marin agreed. "I gave you an easy exit." "I know," Marin said. "I didn't want it." Victoria studied her for a long moment, something almost not quite respect, but adjacent to it, moving behind her cold eyes. "You know how it ends." "I know how everything ends eventually," Marin said. "I'd rather spend whatever time I have loving something real than spend it protecting myself from a loss that hasn't happened yet. Life's too short for the alternative." Even his. Across the room, Nathaniel caught her eye, some instinct alerting him. The way it always seemed to exactly where she was in any crowded space, and the look on his face, warm and unguarded in a way 300 years apparently hadn't managed to fully suppress, made something in Marin's chest go soft and certain all at once. Victoria followed her gaze, saw the expression on Nathaniel's face, and for once said nothing at all. She simply nodded once, something like acknowledgement, and disappeared back into the crowd. Marin crossed the room toward him, scars uncovered, chin up, exactly the way she'd looked the first time he'd seen her, except now she understood, finally, what he'd been seeing all along. Not a wound, just her.